This is the second talk about the history of Enfield Chase, focusing on hunting, to which the concept of a chase owes its existence. The talk introduces some basic features of the hunt and explains its significance to Enfield and to medieval aristocratic society. Although medieval in origin, the Enfield Chase hunt exists today, operating not within the London Borough of Enfield, but within parts of Enfield Chase north of the M25 in Hertfordshire, and further beyond into Bedfordshire. The hunt uses scent trails rather than live foxes or other quarry. In 1907, Major Smith Bosanquet, pictured here, hunted foxes in the Hertfordshire Hunt Country, and the Enfield Chase was established in 1935 to hunt the country formerly hunted by Major Bosanquet Smith. The Enfield Chase hunt today bears little relation to the historical hunt, either in terms of the type of hunting or its geographical location. So where can we look today to get a sense of the traditional hunting in Enfield Chase? Enfield has a hunting folklore associated in particular with King James I and these two local public houses. James hunted in Enfield Chase and had a huge deer park constructed at Theobald's Park in Cheshunt, partly from land taken out of the chase. Both pubs are located on land that stood on the boundary between Enfield Chase and Theobald's Park. It's claimed that the pied bull in Bull's Cross was originally constructed as kennels for the use of James's hunting dogs. The King and Tinker is named after a popular ballad which recounts a tale of how James was out hunting fallow deer when he became separated from his courtiers, and so took refuge in an alehouse on the edge of the wood. According to the ballad, James shared a drink or two with a tinker, or mender of kettles, who, ignorant of his royal majesty's presence, is later rewarded with a knighthood at the king's palace. Both pubs are Grade II heritage listed, but although very old, sadly neither go back as far as the time of King James I, who died in 1625. If the folk tales around these public houses cannot be verified, what evidence is there of hunting in Enfield Chase, and how far back in time does it go? This map from Cuthbert Whitaker's History of Enfield, produced in 1911, shows how the local area probably would have appeared in Anglo-Saxon and Danish times before the chase existed. A monk of Canterbury, William Fitzstephen, writing in the middle of the 13th century, remarked that this land in North Middlesex was an immense forest in which are densely wooded thickets, the coverts of game, red and fallow deer, boars and wild bulls. It was the area's reputation for potential quarry, such as those remarked upon by Fitzstephen, that made it a desirable hunting ground. Red deer and roe deer are the two native species of English deer. Fallow deer are thought to have been introduced to England by the Normans along with rabbits. A hart was a male red deer and a hind was a female deer. A hart of 10 tines, or 10 points on its antlers, was considered the noblest prey. The obituary of William the Conqueror in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle of 1087 says, "The King William set up great protection for deer, and legislated to that intent, that whosoever should slay a hart or hind should be blinded. He loved the deer as if he were their father." So how can we know what hunting was like in medieval Enfield Chase? Well, one major source of information is what are known as hunting treatises, or hunting manuals, which were very popular with nobles throughout Europe. This image is taken from the most famous and richly illustrated treatise called the Livre de Chasse in French, which translates as the Book of the Hunt. It was produced in around the year 1387 for the Count of Foix in Languedoc, southwest France. The Count's name was Gaston Fébou. Many of the ideals of French hunting were transmitted to England through an English translation of this book in the year 1406. Commissioned by the second Duke of York, the English version was entitled Master of Game. What were the main types of hunting in Enfield Chase? This old map, which we encountered in the first talk, provides a clue. The map shows the boundaries of the chase in the 17th century, with Potter's Bar to the north, Southgate to the south, Hadley to the west, and Enfield to the east. Although it's likely to have changed somewhat over time, by the time of this map, the main area of the chase was over 8,000 acres, or 13 square miles in extent, large enough to provide for this sort of horseback hunting, favoured by kings in their prime. It involved teams of dogs working in relay and slowly wearing down the deer before going in for the kill, a type of hunting known in the Middle Ages as par force de chien, or hunting by strength of dogs. This was a noble form of hunting in which the prize quarry was a mature male red deer. It was also a very dangerous form of hunting, and accidents were common. Horseback hunting was considered to engender noble forms of behaviour, including courage and fighting skills that were transferable to the battlefield. To the east side of the chase are shown two deer parks. To the north is Enfield Little Park, and to the south is Enfield Old Park. These two deer parks were the location of another form of hunting, known as bow and stable, as shown here. This commonly involved packs of dogs and beaters driving deer down towards a hunting party, who would shoot the deer either from positions concealed behind vegetation or from a platform known as a standing. This photograph shows the view across part of what was once Old Park in the foreground, looking towards Enfield Chase in the background. Slopes such as this were ideal for bow and stable hunting within deer parks, and would involve beaters driving deer down into the valley bottom, where the hunting party would be waiting with their bows and arrows. At the bottom of this slope are the remains of a medieval park keeper's house, now a scheduled ancient monument. This map of Enfield Chase dated 1727 shows the area around West Lodge. The lodge itself is lost within the torn segment on the left-hand side. The map was produced for the Duke of Chandos, then the Ranger of Enfield Chase. Inside this blue box, enlarged on the right, is a depiction of hunting par force de chien, which by this time was known in English as French-style hunting. This later hunting treatise, entitled The Noble Art of Venery or Hunting, was printed in London in 1611, around the same time as the map we looked at the beginning of the talk. The word venery is an archaic word of French origin, and it reveals the French influence on hunting in England. Much of the book is devoted to a wide range of different quarry, including the hart, or adult male red deer, as we might expect, but also a very wide range of different beasts. Very strangely, you can see sections on hunting wolves, bears, and even reindeer. By 1611, all of these animals were long extinct. Wolves were hunted to extinction in England by the middle of the 12th century, bears were extinct in the wild by the 5th century, and reindeer died out around the time of the last ice age. So why did the author of this work include these creatures? Well, scholars believe that these treatises tell us a lot about the creation of an exclusive aristocratic culture and jargon of hunting. This is evident here in the bottom, in the section about the proper terms of venery. The section on the measures of blowing is about different hunting tunes that can be played on the hunting horn, another aspect of the aristocratic hunt that set them apart from the common people. This image is from the first edition of The Noble Art of Venery, published in 1575. In this case, the image is made all the more interesting by the picture of a woman being handed a knife, clearly with the intention of dispatching the poor animal. We know that in this case the woman portrayed in the picture is Queen Elizabeth I, herself a keen hunter. It was possibly an attempt by the author to ingratiate himself with the Queen. It's been suggested that the figure represented here is the author.
The scene bears a striking resemblance to a later passage written by the antiquarian John Nichols in 1823 in his book called The Progresses and Processions of Queen Elizabeth I. The passage goes as follows. In April 1557, Elizabeth was escorted from Hatfield to Enfield Chase by a retinue of 12 ladies clothed in white satin on ambling palfreys, and 20 yeomen in green, all on horseback, that her grace might hunt the hart. At entering the chase or forest, she was met by 50 archers in scarlet boots and yellow hats, armed with gilded bows, one of whom presented her a silver-headed arrow, winged with peacock's feathers. Sir Thomas Pope had the devising of this show, and this is the part that the picture describes. It goes on, by way of the closing of this sport, or rather ceremony, the princess was gratified with the privilege of cutting the throat of a buck. It seems very likely to me that in drafting this passage, Nicholl was inspired by this picture, and therefore it seems likely that in Nicholl's mind at least, this scene must have been in Enfield Chase. In the later 1611 edition of this work, shown here on the right, the figure of Elizabeth has been scratched out and replaced by King James I, who ascended to the throne of England in 1603 on the death of Elizabeth. James too, like Elizabeth, hunted in Enfield Chase, and spent a lot of time at Theobald's Palace adjacent to Enfield Chase. James was a fanatical hunter. For more information on Theobald's Palace, please watch my next talk.
The records of Elsing Palace, within the grounds of what is now Forty Hall, indicate that the area of the park around the palace known as Little Park at one time included a standing for hunting deer. These often consisted of a simple wooden platform towards which the deer would be driven by dogs and beaters. This picture shows a young Elizabeth on the platform with her courtiers. Elizabeth is holding a broken branch, a tableau item indicating the passage of a deer. The huntsman kneeling before her is presenting her with further evidence of the deer. Page 66 of the hunting manual indicates the different types of fumishings, or deer droppings. As explained at the bottom of the page, if droppings be great, large, and thick, it is a sign that they are hearts of 10. This meant a stag with 10 pointed antlers, in other words, a desirable trophy. A feast following the hunt was a key part of the social occasion. The means to display extravagant hospitality was part of what distinguished a powerful lord, and in particular the monarch. Given strict forest laws against hunting venison, it was not available on the open market, and was therefore seen primarily as the food of kings and their guests. Sometimes hunts could be followed by a lavish picnic at the hunting grounds, as depicted here, where Elizabeth is again seen as the centre of attention. Tapestries, often draped down the walls of banqueting halls, as may be seen today, for example at Hampton Court Palace, were a popular way of displaying great wealth, and also served the practical purpose of keeping out chilly draughts in winter. Henry VIII is recorded as owning 2,450 tapestries, including over 300 that represented hunting in various guises. Henry and his son Edward and daughter Elizabeth often visited Enfield, and would no doubt have brought tapestries with them to their houses. This extract from a late 15th century tapestry shows the final stage of the hunt, known by the French word curé. This represents the dissection of the deer, which involved the best bits of the carcass being reserved for the nobility, and the dogs were fed the entrails. The innards were known as umbles, and were sometimes made into pies to distribute charitably to the poor, and this is the origin of the modern expression to eat humble pie. Hunting tapestries often contained depictions of courtly love. The hunt was a common metaphor for sexual conquest, although whether the scene depicted here represents love or harassment is perhaps an open question. Dogs were essential to hunting, and a huge amount of attention is devoted to them in the hunting manuals. This scene shows the attention that handlers lavished on the dogs, washing and bandaging them, clipping their nails, and generally pampering them. There were three main types of hunting dog. Greyhounds were generally used for hunting fallow deer, spaniels for hunting woodcocks, hence the name Cocker Spaniel, and alaunts, which are no longer bred, but were a type of mastiff used for hunting boar and red deer. Besides horseback hunting and bow and stable hunting, a third type of hunting was with nets and snares. These were used not so much for sport as for an easy way to catch food for the table, although there is a record of Queen Elizabeth I hunting with nets at Theobald's next to Enfield Chase in 1590. In this picture you can see various types of snare, including in the foreground the production of rope using the spinning wheel. Thanks for listening. The next talk will be about the great houses of Enfield and the deer parks that surrounded them.